Norwich Cathedral, the Romanesque Cloister and the Sculptural Revolution. Hello, I am Stephen Heywood, and this is the second talk on my series on the Romanesque Cathedral at Norwich. My last talk gave an introduction to the history and archaeology of the years around the foundation of Norwich Cathedral, and I hope that some of you may have been able to see for yourselves the story I was trying to explain. We looked briefly at architectural sculpture, the basic volute and cushion capitals, and significant variants. By using the word architectural identifies the purpose and character of the sculpture. It is as servant to the architectural forms offered to it, used to emphasize certain main lines and junctions, helping to clarify, define, and articulate the separate different spaces in a building. In a typical Romanesque building, as this detail of Norwich Cathedral shows, sculpture occurs on the capitals, on the tops of shafts, half shafts, or nook shafts. On the top of each capital is an abacus, which is chamfered, where the sharp edge or arris of a piece of squared stone is cut away at an angle of about 45 degrees. The arises of arches are sometimes separated into different orders or arches within arches. Usually, the slightly wedge-shaped stones which form the arches, the voussoirs, receive sculptural emphasis. Where there is a risk of areas of blank masonry, the wall is made into architecture with blind arcades. Particularly special at Norwich, turning each bay of the clerestory into a little temple or edicule with miniature columns and arches of its own. The most commonly used decorative forms are the roll moulding or angle roll, accompanied normally by a hollow roll or cavetto. These decorate all the main nave arches and the blind arcades which line the aisles of the building. Also used a lot is billet moulding, which could be described as interrupted roll mouldings, sometimes as a single row, but more often of two rows syncopated. Perhaps the most known of Romanesque or Norman motifs is the zigzag or chevron, and comes in a variety of degrees of complexity. It occurs very boldly here in the nave of the cathedral at gallery level. All these decorative motifs, apart from the highly developed clerestory edicules, are common to most major Romanesque buildings. But Norwich has also some early sculpture of exceptional quality. This is the Romanesque cloister capitals and decorated voussoirs, recovered by chance during repairs to the South Walk in the year 1900. 14 double capitals and 25 decorated voussoirs and 7 carved gemstones which line doorways were discovered. This is a nearly complete double capital, with the carving of a hairy wild beast biting the left arm of a skirted figure. Most of the double capitals have been turned round and recut for reuse in the building of the new cloister begun in 1297. The existing cloister is a replacement of the original arcading and a refacing of the original walls. This is the present east walk, looking south. Before Bishop Herbert's death, work on the monastic or conventual buildings was advancing and was probably nearing completion by the time of his death in 1119. This coloured plan, in more detail to the right, shows this clearly. The plan was drawn by Arthur Whittingham, who was a cathedral architect and archaeologist from the 1930s almost until his death in 1986. The black corresponds to the original building. The plan was updated as discoveries came to light. See in particular the chapter house, which was found beneath the present roadway to the east of the cloister. Copies of the plan used to be widely available. The 14 recovered double capitals, each pair of one plain capital and one decorated, were supported on separate columns clearly relating to the arcade which surrounded the garth, with the decorated capitals corresponding to the walks. All of the decorated capitals are carved deeply and undercut with a great degree of skill. This one is inspired from the Scandinavian Romanesque style of interlace, of quasi-animal-like writhing forms, transforming themselves into tendrils. Romanesque is a remote part of central Norway and has a Romanesque timber-framed church where this interlace, carved into a wooden exterior wall, is used at a far larger scale. This slide shows the Norwich interlace side by side with that of Romanesque. The Norwich Capital is a masterpiece of sculptural design and execution, and employing in stone a complex decorative design from the tradition of timber construction, used in metalwork as well, of a Scandinavian dominant race in East Anglia before the Normans. Another capital of complex foliage is inhabited on one side by a little figure entwined in the tendrils of the vine scroll, and flanked by beaded trefoils with bulbous leaves known as Byzantine blossom. On the adjacent side, just the upper half of the figure is carved, and on the third and last space the figure has disappeared entirely. The significance of this is uncertain, but is more than just the green man or woad-woes commonly found in medieval scrollwork. Several of the capitals narrate events, difficult to interpret, but depict lively figures in battle, moving from scene to scene round the capital. The figures show movement with superposing limbs and realistic drapery. This slide, for example, shows the three sides of a capital, with firstly a figure in a long robe holding a wand or spoon, possibly an aspergill, a holy water sprinkler with which we are familiar at Norwich Cathedral, in her right hand, and carrying a bucket in the other. A bearded man inclines his head. His leg crosses that of the warrior on the next slide, cleverly negotiating the corner. The warrior has fired an arrow at his combatant, who carries a sword and shield. Below the figures is a trefoil with one bulbous leaf, like Byzantine blossom. The last panel is a person on horseback carrying something, perhaps his bow. It is too damaged to say exactly what. This slide is a drawing of the three sides together. The interpretation of the figure holding an aspergill is unknown elsewhere in Christian religious imagery, and Jill Franklin has suggested that the figure might represent the witch Circe, with a wand rather than aspergill, who transforms the companions of Odysseus into pigs. The use of pagan literature may surprise, but monastic libraries were well stocked with classical texts, and there was a familiarity with them. On another capital, one side shows an archer stretching a bow with his feet from a sitting position. The bow is charged with arrows. The detail of the quiver on his back is visible. The unusual posture of the archer may again be a reference to the Odyssey, where Odysseus stretches his powerful bow from a seated position to demonstrate his effortless superiority to Penelope's suitors. The voussoirs and jamb fragments obviously come from a former doorway into the cloister. The span, which can be judged to have been between 2 and 3 meters, suggests that they may have been part of the entrance to the chapter house off the east walk. This slide shows the jamb fragments to the right and the voussoirs on the ground. The voussoirs have various floral motifs, and in particular drilled keeled billet mouldings, shown here on the left-hand side. The keeled moulding, as opposed to the normal roll moulding, is generally thought to have made its first appearance in England at Durham between 1133 and 40, which means that they may belong to a slightly later date than the cloister capitals. However, they are seen in Normandy at Cerisy-la-Forêt in the late 11th century, and therefore could be earlier than the Durham example. The distinctive drilled keel moulding becomes a major feature of the Norman doorways to several parish churches in South Norfolk. This slide is of Heckingham near Loddon in South Norfolk. In 2018, during the works to make a ramped entrance to the cloister garth, important further fragments were revealed. There were several voussoirs with simple zigzag decoration. The pattern was simply cut out of the arch arrises on both sides, without rolls or further embellishment. The recovered voussoirs produce arches of 800 millimeters or 2 foot 7 inches diameter, and from this information, adding the width of the double capitals, it is possible to calculate the sizes of the cloister openings and thus the number of arches in the walks. This drawing by Roland Harris illustrates this calculation. Another rare display of Romanesque sculpture is in our sister cathedral at Ely. 2 lavishly decorated doorways lead into the former cloister walks, but no cloister capitals survive to make a proper comparison. The sculpture is complete and still in situ, a wonder to behold. However, the packed surfaces compare not at all well with the more accurate and measured sophistication of the Norwich material. Note also the almost absurd proportions of the angel's arms supporting the mandorla against the more realistic human forms at Norwich. The treatment of the jambs is comparable and shows the superiority of the Norwich fragments with the more undercut detail and naturalism. There is an amusing similarity of kneeling figures in the surviving nookshaft capital at Norwich on the left, and the abbot on the trefoil tympanum of the monk's doorway at Ely. Despite Ely and Norwich being so close, it is thought that the Ely work is a few years earlier than Norwich, and the works of different teams of sculptors. However, both cathedrals experienced this sudden transformation or revolution in sculptural skills, from very basic, almost childlike capital sculpture to the highly accomplished and ingenious sculpture, which we are very lucky to have a few valuable remnants. The Norwich collection, which is of international importance, has only once been given the display and exhibition it deserves locally, at the Sainsbury Centre for Visual Arts in 1980. This slide is part of the exhibition where the sculpture is effectively displayed within a reconstructed arcade, and the cover of the catalogue published for the exhibition, with most of the text by Jill Franklin. Certain pieces have been lent for exhibitions elsewhere in the world. It is hoped that a suitable setting for a more permanent display can be found here, at the place where it was made 900 years ago. Before leaving, 2 amusing carved heads, rarely noticed, should be mentioned. They are mounted high up at the east end of the cathedral, on either side of the main altar. They are surprisingly naturalistic in comparison with other pieces in the cathedral church. They are integral with the original masonry and appear to have no particular liturgical significance, despite their closeness to the altar. One of them has a beard and jaunty moustaches, whilst the other has bulbous drilled eyes with a doleful expression. They bear comparison with the heads on the prior's door at Ely, but their slightly characterful faces suggest that they may have been recut during restoration works and given humorous expressions, suggesting, for example, cocky Norman on one side, opposing an oppressed Briton on the other. I hope you found this talk of interest. The sculpture of the Romanesque cloister capitals is of the highest quality. They compare with the greatest 12th century cloisters anywhere in Romanesque Europe. Think of Moissac and Autun in France. Although damaged and fragmentary, it gives us an idea of what the cloister resembled when the rioters of August 1272 broke in and set about their destruction. The cloister was at the centre of monastic life, and my next talk will be on the remaining evidence of the buildings which surrounded it, and on the Romanesque Bishop's Palace on the north side of the cathedral. Thank you.